It's real-life Jurassic Park with purpose.
Where are they going to put them?
First one they're working on is the woolly mammoth, right? And this isn't just for fun. This has real, like, important conservation implications, which is really fascinating. Starting with, I think, 100 mammoths and putting them in this park in Siberia that they've been doing this experiment on as to what happens when you add megafauna back into the Arctic tundra to offset carbon emissions.
Wow. And so they're using what DNA? They're using elephant DNA and mixing it with something else?
Indian elephant is the closest living relative to the woolly mammoth.
And what does an Indian elephant look like? Is it similar to an elephant?
Yeah, it's a smaller, so African elephants are bigger. They have the really big ears.
Right.
Indian elephants are typically the ones you'd see at the circus, with the pink in the ears, the smaller triangular shaped ears. And they're using CRISPR technology and they're using existing mammoth DNA and they're making an embryo and then they're implanting it into the Indian elephant, and 22 months later, an Indian elephant's gestation period, she will give birth to a mammoth.
A real mammoth?
A real mammoth.
So it's not like a hybrid?
If you imagine the DNA of an animal, right? And then you imagine the fragments that are broken out of it, right? What they're doing is they're taking that DNA and all those pieces that are missing from the mammoth, they're putting in Indian elephant pieces. So you end up with an animal that is physically and morphologically identical to a mammoth, but has used all of the DNA from the closest living relatives in order to get there.
Phew. This process, how long does this take?
So I think they've been going for about 5 years on the science, but the science of de-extinction and cloning, I mean, you remember Dolly the sheep, right? That was like a known thing. So that's been going on for a long time.
Well, you can get your cat cloned.
Exactly.
Or your dog cloned.
Exactly. For like 20 grand, you can clone your dog. Yeah. So the science has been there for a while. There just hasn't really been the funding or the motivation for it. But what I think so fascinating, the reason I'm so like emotionally invested in it, is the conservation implications that it has. Rewilding species that humans have removed. And that's going to, in theory, in a lot of places, sort of fix the offset, the imbalance of the ecosystem.
That's interesting. There's a lot of debate about whether or not humans killed off the woolly mammoth, though, isn't there?
I think there is, yeah. So the Arctic used to be like the savannas of Africa. It used to be big grasslands, right? It wasn't all covered in trees and things. And that's a recent adaptation since the mammoths went away 10, 20,000 years ago. And so that's what's happened is the permafrost up there is melting pretty rapidly, right? Underneath that permafrost is like 1.5 trillion tons of carbon. And once that carbon enters the atmosphere, it heats things up like crazy. So once we removed all the megafauna from the Arctic through hunting or maybe other means, regardless, the Arctic got warmer. The Siberia and Alaska got warmer. And so slowly we're getting more and more carbon emissions from up there. But by putting these animals back, and I just love the idea of going up to the Arctic and it looking like the African savanna, right, with all of these incredible animals. By putting these animals back, it in theory will make the Arctic colder, slow down the melting of the permafrost, which will in turn trap the carbon for longer in the ground.
So they're going to start with the woolly mammoth.
Yeah.
And what other animals are they thinking about doing this to?
The woolly mammoth and the thylacine, which is another reason I'm so excited.
So they are going to bring back the thylacine.
Yeah.
And how are they going to do that?
So there's, it used to be the quoll, but now it's an animal called a dunnart that's the closest living relative. And so, thylacines were around pretty recently, right? I mean, we're just looking at video of one. Yeah. So they have really good DNA from the thylacine, and then they're going to use the existing DNA from a dunnart, which is a very small marsupial, put them together, remake the thylacine. Isn't it crazy we're living in this time?
Yeah, it sounds like a horror movie.
But it's so insane. Like, even 3 years ago, if you're like, hey, we're bringing animals back, we're going to put mammoths back in the Arctic, you're like, shut up. Like, go put on your tinfoil hat. Like, it's happening. It's
when
so
are they
crazy.
projecting the first woolly mammoth will be launched?
2024.
What?
Yeah.
Next year?
Next year. End of next year.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. It'll be
fascinating. Are they going to do saber-toothed tigers?
I hope so. No, I don't know.
Shit,
I don't know.
That would be incredible. What a wild animal those must have been to look at.
Saber-tooths?
Giant teeth.
Yeah.
Like literally hang out of their mouth. And apparently are so sensitive that they could find jugulars. Like
with those teeth?
Yeah. They could feel the pulsating jugular with their teeth.
Just because of the nerve endings in it? I didn't know that. Yeah. That's amazing. That's the fun Jurassic Park side of it, right? Like, would I like to see a saber-toothed cat? Yes. Who wouldn't? Yeah. But the idea that, like, hey, 10 years from now, there's going to be several thousand thylacine back in Tasmania. Facial tumor disease is going to go away. The overabundance of prey is going to disappear.
Facial tumor disease?
A lot of the animals, and particularly the Tasmanian devils have in Tasmania, it's herpes on the face. But it comes from an overabundance of prey because the alpha predator, the thylacine, has been knocked out. So... But anyway, I'm just excited because it's like, it seems like we live in an alternate universe where these things are real now, which is just so crazy compared to a few years ago.
The North American mammals, like, are they planning on eventually doing that North American mammals as well and reintroducing some?
I'm not sure. Well, the mammoth would be in Alaska, so that's North America.
Yeah.
Mammoth steppe environment, those grasslands, used to range from Spain all the way to North America, like all across the Bering Land Bridge. And all that ice was like trampled and blah, 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 all these savanna lands that are now big forests.
Are you aware of the Alaskan boneyard?
I need to listen to the whole show. I mean, John sounds like a fascinating guy.
He's the best.
Yeah.
But his place that he has in Alaska, like, they've been on, and it's not a big area where he's finding this stuff.
Yeah.
He's got 2 areas, and one of them that he's been getting bones, what he calls boning, this one area for decades.
Yeah.
It's like the side of a cliff, and they blast it with water until they see things, and then they pull out these bones. But they've found animals that were not supposed to be there.
So scimitar cats were the cat that was native to that continent, to Alaska, right? Not saber-tooth. Saber-tooth's big teeth, scimitar is like a smaller tooth version. And then he's found saber-tooth skulls on his property.
Yes.
So all of history, all of humans are like, oh no, there's only scimitar cats in Alaska. They were never saber-tooths, and he's found actual saber-tooths.
Yes. And he's only looked in 6 acres.
Can you imagine?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't know what was going on in that area. Like, why are there so many dead animals?
Yeah.
And why did they all get, like, frozen into the permafrost?
Into one spot.
Yeah.
Right.
A cave lion.
Cave
That's
lion.
a cave lion.
Cool.
I don't know if they thought that was there, too. The Younger Dryas impact theory is somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,000 years ago, there was some impacts from comets.
Oh,
and
interesting.
it probably wiped out most of the animals that we're thinking about, like North American megafauna. Like 65% of them were wiped out somewhere around that time period. He thinks they're wiped out from comet impact.
Interesting.
And he thinks that's why you're finding these massive storages of these dead animals in this one specific area. They just get smacked back. But that these things most likely died in mass, and that this area where John Reeves has in Alaska is a particularly fertile area, a particularly rich area for finding these skeletons.
Why else would you have 300 dead animals with fractured bones in one spot?
Exactly.
You know, or whatever the numbers are. But
and I mean, he has so much.
Yeah.
He has thousands